32a.
Be tough.
Two lines down. The basic verse lay time. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about here the guy was in a he was a kohen. The finder is a kohen. He was not allowed to go to a cemetery to pick up the lost object, even if his father tells him to. So the Gemara says, "Tanar bottom." How do we know if somebody's father tells him to become tamei and he's a kohen, he's not allowed to become tamei, or his father says, "Don't return the lost object"? And again, the Torah commands him to return the lost object. How do we know Shal Yishmael shouldn't listen to him? Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "Ish imay va'av tiroba shabtsoisi tishmeru ani Hashem." Okay, the verse says a person should fear his father and his mother, and should keep the Shabbos and Hashem, I am God. So what does that tell me? A person and his father and his mother are all obligated to listen to God. Therefore, the commandment to serve God or God's commandments are not overridden by what a person's father or mother tell him. So the Gemara asks the obvious question. The reason, in other words, you're telling me the reason why a person listens to God over his father and his mother is because the verse specifically mentions it. But without the verse specifically telling you that God comes before your father and mother, then you would think that you'd listen to your parents. The Gemara asks why. There's a positive commandment to serve your parents, to honor your parents. However, with regard to returning a lost object, there's a positive and negative commandment. There's a positive commandment to return it. There's a negative commandment that don't turn a blind eye. Similarly, with regard to a kohen becoming tamei, there's a negative commandment, don't become tamei, and there's a positive commandment to keep the laws of kahuna, to stay pure. So how can a single positive commandment override both positive and negative commandments? The general rule is that we would not allow you to violate a positive and negative commandment to fulfill another positive commandment. So the Gemara says it's necessary. Silent. I mean, I would think. Because the verse, there's sort of an equivalence created between honoring your parents and honoring God, right? As we can point out, the luchas, right? There are 2 tablets. There are 5 commandments in each tablet. First 5 commandments are obligations that man has to God. And what's the 5th of the 10 commandments?
Honor thy father.
On your parents.
So 32b, right?
32a.
32a.
We're on the widest line.
Okay.
The first line. This is the second line. So I would think that because the verse equates the 2 of them, so it puts honor and fear of parents in the same category as honor and fear of God. So therefore, it would be like the same thing that God says. Therefore, the verse says, no. It's like obeying God, but it isn't obeying God. It isn't directly in the same class. And therefore, if God tells you to do something, your parents tell you something else, you don't listen to your parents. Okay. So mitzvah and Torah lifrak avlolat. So you saw in the Mishnah yesterday, there's 2 separate mitzvahs. One mitzvah is to load an animal. A guy needs help to load. And another mitzvah is if an animal is stumbling, to unload the animal. Okay, so the Mishnah says mitzvah and Torah lifrak avlolat. The mitzvah and the Torah is to unload, but not to load. So the Gemara says, "My avlolat." And what does it mean by not to load? Ilam avlolat and klal. That there's no mitzvah at all to load it. If somebody needs help loading his animal, to load it. The Mishnah says, why is that? By prika, by unloading, it says ozev taziv, help him load it, load the animal. It says to load the verse also says to load the animal. So let's explain. The commandment to unload an animal is to be performed without pay. If a person that has a loaded animal that's struggling and having a hard time, there's a mitzvah to help him unload it. However, if on the other hand the person needs help loading his animal, then you're allowed to charge. Reb Shimon says, "Af litain bechinam." You can also load an animal without charge. So the Gemara says, "Tanina lahad tan rabbanon." Okay, so Shimon disagrees. The machlokes in the rabbis and Shimon, if loading an animal, one is allowed to charge for. Okay.
So is it required to load as just as well as it is to unload? That's what
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to understand if it.
So loading an animal here. Let's clarify first. Let's first clarify something. Okay. Let's say I have a factory. I make yogurts. Okay. And I have a pack animal to give all the yogurts out to the local supermarket. I can't just call you off the street and say, "Oh, mitzvah, come and tell me load my animal." It's not referring to.
No, right. It's referring if it was unloaded. Now,
so we're talking about where it was unloaded, sort of in a because of a difficulty.
Right.
So the guy's on the road somewhere. His animal was overloaded. He somehow managed to unload it, but now he needs help to reload it. If the guy's sort of in his shop or something, he doesn't get somebody to help.
I guess my question is that part derisive too?
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
So okay, let me clarify first.
Yeah.
Let me explain. So the Gemara, the Mishnah says the mitzvah to load but not to unload. Well, what does that mean? Both of them are written in the verses. So do you mean to say it's not a mitzvah to help somebody load an animal? So the Gemara says, well, no, obviously not, right? They are both mitzvahs. Well, the difference is, do you load with pay or without pay? Can you charge for your services to load the animal? To unload an animal that's struggling, you can't charge. To load an animal, you could charge. And Rav Shimon disagrees.
All right.
Good. Now let's explain the difference between Rav Shimon and sorry. Let's try to explain the difference between Rav Shimon and the rabbis.
You're literally being held together, Rabbi, by a thin tissue.
Yes, indeed. Okay. 1 second. Okay. Four lines into the wide lines. So we have a brayso that explains similarly. Unloading is free. Loading is with pay. Shimon Aimer Zuv is a bechinam. They're both free. What's the reason of the rabbis? He's talking like Reb Shimon because if we go with Reb Shimon that says it's free, lift the rachmana to inav by prika. But amina umatina less by tzar balachayim, but like a tzar and kiss. Figure this, but tzar balachayim, tzar and kiss like holshkin. Okay, so let's explain this. What's the So if you have to put te'ina and prika on a scale, you'll say that prika is less of a stretch than te'ina. Unloading, it's more logical the Torah would require you to help somebody unload than to load. Why? Because unloading has two problems. Number one, the guy's stuff is going to get ruined. And second of all, that you have an animal who's suffering. Loading doesn't have either of these arguments.
Okay.
Say the rabbis, if the Torah meant to say that they're both in the same category, the Torah could just say that you're obligated to load somebody's animal. And then I would know that you're also obligated to unload someone's animal. The fact that Torah repeats both of them tells me that there's a difference between the two of them. Unloading is free, loading is with pay. Unloading is free, loading is with pay. Shimon, my time, okay. What about Rav Shimon? Shimon, my time, okay, so according to Rav Shimon, the verses sort of they don't exactly spell it out absolutely clearly, that one's loading and one's unloading. If the Torah would only write one, I would interpret it to mean unloading. Now, what about the fact that the verse says that it says it's it says you have an animal that fell. 1 second. You have an animal that fell. You turn your eye from it. Talk him, help him reload it. So Shimon says that hakim that help him reload it. It's not clear that actually means to reload. It could also mean that it means to unload it. So Shimon would argue like this: if Torah only listed one, and I would interpret that one verse to be unloading, not loading. So that's why I need two verses: one to tell me unloading, and then one to tell me loading. Okay, the rabbis say that it's not true that the verses are sort of unclear. In one place it says, the animal is roivetz, it's sort of kneeling under the weight of its burden. In the other verse, when we talk about unloading, what do we say? The animal has fell from its burden. it's kneeling from the burden. In the other instance, it says it fell on the road. What do you think falling means? It fell off of him. That the animal fell with all the stuff on it, and it needs help. The guy needs help to reload the animal. So, in other words, the rabbis say the verses are considered pretty clear.
So, what's the mitzvah?
There's a mitzvah. If an animal's struggling, there's a mitzvah to help unload it. And if the animal's fell already, unload the pack of the animal. And loading is the same thing, same commandment. So if the stuff fell off, it's a mitzvah to reload it. Okay. Rav Shimon, so the rabbi said the verses are clear. Rav Shimon says, Rav Shimon says falling doesn't mean that it fell off. It means that the animal, it could mean at least, the animal fell with its loads. So actually, what you really need to do here is unload it. So that's why if the verse would have only said one category, then what would I say? I would say that it refers to unloading, which is the more logical mitzvah. Loading is the less logical mitzvah. Obviously, it's logical as well, but it's not as pressing to help somebody reload his animal than it is to help somebody unload an animal's stomach.
I just had a thought. I mean, if you reload the animal with the same load, it's going to be just as heavy.
One second. So okay, we'll have to get to that.
You'll get to that.
We'll have to get to that. Very. Yeah, well,
it's not necessarily that it's too heavy. It's
very good.
Balanced right.
Okay, very good. It can't be. Okay,
good,
it can't be that the animal is loaded too heavy. We'll soon see why. The animal is loaded too heavy. You don't help him reload it.
Ooh.
Okay.
Well, but you could if you chose.
Now we get to a very fundamental Gemara, very oft-quoted Gemara. I'm a Rav. From both the rabbis and Reb Shimon, we learn causing pain to animals is biblical. It's a question whether it's biblical or it's rabbinical. There's no verse.
To animals.
Sorry?
Preventing the act of pain on animals.
Right. So the question is that prevention biblical or not? And again, there's no specific Torah obligation. The question is there a source for it in the Torah? Okay. Why is this? Because they say that unloading is if you only had one choice, you would choose, if the Torah only gave one command, it would give the command of unloading an animal. And that indicates why? Because why is unloading more pressing than loading? Because unloading has the component of tsar balei of an animal suffering. Shimon is only arguing because the verses aren't clear. But Rabbi Shimon fundamentally doesn't dispute the assumption that's made by the rabbis that unloading has an addition. There are two logical reasoning, there are two logical ideas that would indicate to us that unloading is more important than loading, causing pain to the animal and the fact that there's monetary loss. Why is prika unloading more logical than loading? Because the animal's suffering, and that's why it needs to be unloaded. Whereas when you load the animal's not. If anything, you're causing the animal pain. Yeah, pain, but whatever. You're using it. Using the animal. So the Gemara says no, not necessarily. It could be the reason is because there is financial loss. And this is what we mean to say. One second. Okay, so in other words, it could be that the other reason is really the primary. We said there's two reasons, right? Number one, the animal suffering. Number two, there's a financial loss. The guy's gonna lose his stuff. So maybe the second reason actually is the more important reason. And the fact that we mentioned Tzar B'Chaim, it's not from a biblical framework, but we added it on to the list too. One second. Okay. So the Gemara says, the Gemara makes a presumption. The presumption of the Gemara is that loading an animal does not incur financial loss if it's not loaded. The Gemara says, could it not be the scenario that if the guy doesn't have a chance to load it, he won't be able to do as much business? So there is a financial loss. It's a loss of revenue. Inami, or potentially he's sitting there, he's vulnerable. Who's going to take him? The highwaymen, right? They'll see a good a good vulnerable person to take advantage
Sitting
of.
duck there, yeah.
Exactly. Thank you for the word. Sitting duck. The highwayman will come and take away his stuff. Whatever he has with him. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so now the Gemara sort of leaves it as is. Because we don't really know the answer. Is Tzar B'Chayim biblical or not? Is that the main concern, or is the main concern because it's financial loss? Again, there's two advantages that Prika unloading has over loading: a financial loss and pain of the animal. Now, financial loss, we're really saying, maybe it's not such a good argument, because there are some instances where loading also has financial loss. Now, if that's the case, then the primary argument must be Tzar B'Chayim, pain to an animal, thereby proving that pain from animals is a biblical consideration. So we're sort of hanging. We're not really sure where to go here, right? We don't know. The Gemara sort of has a proof, but there is a counter argument to the proof. And again, we started off with a proof. The proof was Tzar B'Chayim. The counter proof was no, it's not Tzar B'Chayim. It's Chsar and Kiss. And then the counter argument is, well, Chsar and Kiss isn't really either such a good argument. So probably maybe go back to the other argument, which is Tzar B'Chayim. So we're sort of hanging. We're not sure which. Is the counter proof better than the proof? We're not really sure. Okay, so now we try to prove it. Let's prove that Tzar B'Chayim is biblical. The Tanya Sefer, because the end of the Mishnah states, basically the if the animal was overloaded, this is the point you just mentioned, you don't help him out. The animal is struggling under its weight, a weight that the animal could carry otherwise. If the animal couldn't carry the weight because it was overloaded, don't help him. Okay, the fact that Yosef really tells you that you don't help him if it's overloaded, that implies that the first opinion says you would help him if it's overloaded.
Rabbi,
yes.
Can you go ahead and help on your own initiative if you choose to? And just the way you're phrasing it makes it sound like you're not allowed to help.
That's a very good question. I'm not sure. It could be there's no obligation. I would say probably right. It's probably that there's no obligation to help.
But you wouldn't be.
But you could if you wanted to.
Couldn't be hurting.
Yeah.
There's a law, and then there's what you can't be required to do, but maybe it would be a nice thing and a good idea to do. Reshoot.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Okay. So okay, 1 second. My time, okay, so let's explain this. The Kamma says that you do have to help him. Why do you have to help him? What's that? Okay, let me just clarify this for a second. We're not talking here about loading an animal. We're talking about unloading an animal. So what happened? The guy put 1,000 pounds on his donkey. Maybe donkeys can hold 1,000 pounds. I don't know. Not sure. But let's say they can't hold 1,000 pounds. So Rabbi Dovid says, continue walking. It's the owner's fault. Now, the rabbis know the verse of Rabbi Dovid. They know that it says Masai, meaning it has to be an appropriate load. Let's say this is wholly inappropriate. So the rabbis still say go help him. Why go help him? The verse says you're exempt from helping him. It must be because Tzar B'Chayim is the obligation to help him. In other words, the truth of the matter is you shouldn't be exempt from helping him. But because of the law of Tzar B'Chayim, therefore you're obligated to help him.
Well, also there's the problem of causing real trouble in the Kehillah if you just walk on by and you tick that guy off, and he's got a long memory, and you have a few instances like this, and before long you got serious trouble.
Okay, so my time, Gemara says, please. Okay, so okay, so in other words, the presumption here was that the rabbis don't fundamentally disagree with Rabbi Dovid. If they don't disagree with him, then why would you have to unload the animal? It must be because of an independent factor. In other words, the truth of the matter is the verse does not require you to unload an overloaded animal. But because it's Tzar B'Chayim, you have to unload it. And now we're saying, no, maybe there's a debate here. The debate is how to interpret the word Masai. Are you obligated to unload an overloaded animal? Rabbi Dovid says that Masai removes that obligation. You're not obligated, and the rabbis say no. We don't read the verse that way. So therefore, you have the standard obligation to unload an overloaded animal. So there's no proof. Okay, Teda, next attempt. The Tzar Balachayim Lav the rice. Let's try to prove that it's not biblical. The Tani Rashid, the first part of the Mishnah states, okay, let's say the owner of the animal basically refuses to participate. He says, you have the mitzvah, I'm going to go take a nap. So the Gemara says, Potter, then you don't have to help him. Why? Because the verse says, Imai, with him. And if the owner goes to sleep, you're doing it by yourself.
Right.
You're not. Tzar B'Lachaim deraisa. What do you mean? If Tzar B'Lachaim is biblical, Mali is Lamar Bahadei, Mali Kilas Lamar Bahadei. In other words, if there's an obligation to help an animal that's struggling, then who cares where the owner is?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Go help the animal. So this evidently proves that Tzar B'Lachaim Lav deraisa. It isn't biblical. So Gemara has Lav Tzar B'Lachaim deraisa. It is biblical. Misar is Potter L'Gamra. Do you think that exempt means you're completely exempt? The Dilma Potter B'Chinam B'Chayim B'Schar. If he doesn't want to help you, you still have to unload the animal. Tzar B'Lachaim, but you can charge him for it. So if he participates, then he doesn't get charged. If he doesn't participate, then you can charge him. This is what the verse says. If the owner is there, work with him, do it free. But if he's present, then go charge him. Yeah, then go do it because it's but you can charge him. Okay, so now we have Simon. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 different proofs on this matter. Lema Messiah. Let's try to prove this. Let's try to prove Tzar B'Lachaim. You have a non-Jews animal. You have to help them just like a Jewish animal. So the owner of the animal here. Same story, right? Animal needs to be unloaded. It's just owned by a non-Jew. You have to help him. If you said Tzar B'Lachaim, the obligation to help the struggling animals biblical, so then okay, well, who cares who owns the animal, right? Why do you treat it like a Jewish animal? If there's no, what exactly is the obligation to help the animal? Tzar B'Lachaim is not deraisa; it's not biblical. And why do you have to help a non-Jews animal? The commandment to help the Jew is because he's a Jew. And the animal there's no commandment to help the animal. Because Tzar B'Lachaim lav deraisa. It must be that Tzar B'Lachaim is deraisa. So the Gemara says Hasam Mishum Eva. The reason is because of Eva. Eva's animosity. So this is a very important thing. Very important thing. Earlier. It's a very important thing to know, and this is true of in many. I've seen this so many times. When you have an organization that's there primarily to help Jews, right? They don't refuse service to a non-Jew. So you have life-saving organizations of EMTs that go around and help Jews. They don't refuse service to a non-Jew. If a non-Jew calls, they call. They try to make sure that non-Jews don't call, but they be careful of distribution channels. They don't just advertise it publicly. But if a non-Jew calls, then of course they help him. That's all. That's what this is referring to. It's similar. It's true with charity as well. If there are Jews and non-Jews collecting charity together, one gives to everybody. There's certain circumstances where you should, if a non-Jew's collecting charity, you should give it to him. Now, by the way, if a guy is going to use the money for drugs, don't give him money. It's going to kill him. Money is the worst thing you can get.
On that point, I remember fairly clearly reading the Chavetz Chaim's comments on this matter in the Mishnah Berurah section on a pertinent issue. He had very harsh words for Jews who donate to non-Jewish charities, except under this kind of circumstance to preserve the peace. Right. But he was very, he spoke unusually negative terms about
that is true. One in general should not give to non-Jewish charities, except in the context of, and it's animosity.
Yeah.
So you should be cognizant of this animosity. You have to sort of be careful and balance it. This makes sense. Let's say the guy was carrying yain osir, meaning he was carrying wine for the pagan libations. So this is non-kosher wine. Then ein zokla, you don't help him. If you say Tzar B'Lachaim is not biblical, that's why you don't help him. because it's non-kosher, right? Because it's non-kosher wine, there's no obligation to help the animal. Because there's no obligation, Tzar B'Lechaim is not biblical. But if it is biblical, why don't you help him if he's carrying non-kosher wine? Who cares what the wine is? Care about the animal that's suffering.
Right.
On the other hand,
the Gemara explains. We'll just continue here. The Gemara changes the brayso slightly, and it's referring to loading the animal with wine. Yain also ain't zakula, not unloading. Because if Tzar B'Lechaim is deraisa, then you would be obligated to unload his wine. We're not talking about unloading. We're talking about loading. Yes.
Oh, well, there's a countervailing question of if the wine is in question is trade for it, he's doing some yucky purpose with it. If you assist him, you're helping him to commit a number of averas, and you in turn are committing an avera yourself. So that balances the consideration.
No. So there's no again the prohibition on drinking non-kosher wine is to drink it, not to load it onto an animal. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of assisting him, it's not considered. It's not in that category. This is not directly. It's not direct worship. Okay, let's try the next one. Toshma, next example. You have a non-Jew's animal and the load of a Jew. And you withhold yourself from reloading the animal. 1 second. Okay, so if I understand correctly, b'chadalta means that you're allowed to not load it, right?
Right.
You don't have to reload the animal.
You may refrain,
right? You don't have to assist. But if you say that you're suffering in the animal is biblical, you should have to help because the animal's suffering. Who cares that the animal's a non-Jewish animal? So it could be that biblically you would have to help. But over here we're referring to loading an animal. Let's look at the end of the brayso. You have a Jewish animal and a non-Jewish package. Oziv taziv, you have to help him. The ibetina amai oziv taziv. 1 second, but if we're talking here about loading an animal, then why do you have to help him if it's a non-Jewish package? So the Gemara says Mishum Tzar Yisrael because the Jew has the obligation of carrying it. He has the responsibility for the package. So that if you're not going to help him reload the package onto his animal, then he's stuck there.
It's his stuff, the Jew's stuff.
No, it's a non-Jew's animal, but non-Jew stuff. But that means the Jew still has responsibility over it. Oh, so if you don't help him reload it, he's still stuck there in the middle of the roads, not able to do anything. So therefore, you help him reload. Well, why wouldn't that be true then of the first half, where it was a non-Jewish animal and a Jew's stuff? You should also have to help, so the Jew's stuff isn't sitting there forever.
Page position, Rabbi.
7 lines in the bottom of the page. Afilu, it's the first one line. So the Gemara says, Reisha b'chamor oivik chavi. Sefer b'chamor Yisrael. Okay, so the chamor here, I believe, is the leader. It's the one who's sort of leading the animal. Is that the translate chamor here?
Yes. For the minute of anguish experienced.
Idolater? Or no?
Before, what is it before?
You shall certainly help. In fact, you have no obligation to help the idolater load the burden. Oh.
Donkey driver, yeah. Kamar is a donkey driver. The driver of the animal was a non-Jew. And therefore, it's the non-Jew's obligation to unload the animal. You don't have to help. It's the non-Jew's obligation to load the animal. Sefer b'chamor Yisrael, it's the donkey driver is Jewish, and therefore you do have to help him. My piscus, what makes you presume that was a scenario? So the owner of the animal is going to be the driver. So if the owner, the Jewish owner, will have a Jewish driver. The non-Jew is the owner, and the non-Jew will be driving it. So the verse of Ozatazav is referring to Prika of unloading, and that was the verse the Gemara brought to support. So the Gemara says, So Gemara says basically that you're right. We're talking about unloading an animal, And clearly, according this Bryce, it clearly says that unloading an animal is not biblical. It's rabbinical. And it's the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah that says that it isn't biblical. So again, we'll just wrap it up in 30 seconds there. We had a question. Is one obligated to ensure that animal does not suffer needlessly? And that would remain, is that biblical or is that is that rabbinical? We haven't answered the question yet. But we have established that there is a person named Rabbi Yehudah, and Rabbi Yehudah says you're not obligated. How do we know Rabbi Yehudah? Because Rabbi Yehudah says you have an animal that's struggling under an overburden, an insane amount of weight.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to help him. It's the owner's fault. You don't need to help him unload the animal. If the animal's sitting and suffering, you're not obligated. Clearly, Rabbi Yehudah says Tzar B'Chaim is not d'oraisa, is not biblical, and this last brisa that says that Tzar B'Chaim is not biblical is that opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. What is the halacha? What is the Mishnah? Which way does the Mishnah rule? We haven't yet resolved that, and that subject we will continue tomorrow.
Nice.
Okay. So glad I was able to